Real life. Wonders. Especially for the mothers, all present. Oh, 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 I see black women running from their race. They own black children they can't face. They don't know their roots as a glorious bloom. Blessed be the fruit of their womb. They just be acting as though they're ashamed of their history. They just be proud of other people's own. They just be glad to disclose their baby's ancestry, putting their child upon a false throne, not their own. For hear them boast to their friends and their neighbor, my baby's nose from his Spanish grandfather. My grandmother married a Chinese named Lau. That is why the eye's so pretty, and he has such thick eyebrow. The dimple come from the husband's side, whose great-grandfather was Irish. And watch how the eyes pretty and wide, cause my mother mixed with British. And watch at me, I'm Caribbean Portuguese, so the shiny curly, but the baby black down to the eyeball. They see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. I said the baby black like a voodoo doll. They see Africa at all. Oh, 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 oh. All present. Oh, oh, oh. I see black women running from their race. They own black children they can't face. They don't know their roots as a glorious bloom. Blessed be the fruit of their womb. They just be acting as though they're ashamed of their history. They just be proud of other people's own. They just be glad to disclose their baby's ancestry, putting their child upon a false throne, not their own. For hear them boast to their friends and their neighbor, my baby's nose from his Spanish grandfather. My grandmother married a Chinese named Lau. That is why the eye's so pretty, and he has such thick eyebrow. The dimple come from the husband's side, whose great-grandfather was Irish. And watch how the eyes pretty and wide, cause my mother mixed with British. And watch at me, I'm Caribbean Portuguese, so the shiny curly, but the baby black down to the eyeball. They see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. I said the baby black like a voodoo doll. They see Africa at all. see black women running from their race. Food from our table, take your face. If you hear them boast about how they just make French fry and French toast with gut steak, they have a name for all them foreign foods they using. Italian pizza, they murdering. Big African wedding, they serving Spanish rice with Scotch whiskey and French wine on ice to feel nice. Chinese chowing, serving in black christening. English muffin, when the son graduating. They just fry egg and call that Spanish omelette. And frying Irish potato with New Zealand butter instead. Hungarian goulash and Irish stew is what they're preparing for lunch. They even going Honolulu to drink up the Hawaiian punch. That when they brew, they're Bobby and turn cuckoo and swizzle callaloo. Oh, beg your pardon and chamber roll. They don't see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. They're making yam and dashi look small. They don't see Africa at all. Black people must stop running from their race and search this their place for their traits. You don't have to go by plane to Ghana in order to see Africa. Every time you come planting with mortar and pestle, or on your hand you wear your slave band, or when the Boko jumping walk tall amidst the people, then you rubbing shoulders. Africans understand what the neighbors say, how she neighbors string berry in New York City, so that makes her a Yankee. Oh, how she loves stories of Arabian Nights and boasting about her French perfume and her Turkish delights. African dashiki, she was where she would not even plait her hair. Stories of the Nagahu, her children them never hear. That when she husband, Mr. Paul left her last year, she run quickly for Obia. She burning light to put blight on Paul. She ain't see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. The Obia man give she push back to bring back Paul. She ain't see Africa at all.
In this video, I'm going to show you how it's possible.
Yes, yes. One of our gifts to the world, the Calypso, the NC Africa Atoll. The NC Africa Atoll. The story there. Hold on to your culture. African people, Hold on to your culture. It's your own. It's your own. Don't mind mix up and so on, you know. You got to mix with other cultures because we live in a place with other cultures, but hold on to your authentic culture because they hold on to theirs. The NC Africa Atoll. My mother was Amerindian, my father get a little Portuguese, and you know, I get the black people, you know, we like taco, we get other race. But the baby black down to the eyeball, and they ain't see Africa at all. The mighty chalk dust, Dr. Hollis Liverpool. Dr. Hollis Liverpool, the PhD Calypsonian, singing there, the NC Africa at all. Welcome to Africa this evening. Welcome to Africa. There's always a little piece of Africa in this, you know, because we are on a mission. We are on a mission to hold aloft the banner of Ethiopia. Hold aloft the banner of Ethiopia. I grew up in Buxton as a small boy. Here, the big men and women sing Ethiopia, the land of our birth, the land where our forefathers were born. Singing praise to Africa. You all understand the importance of culture, and we are on a mission on this program. We are on a mission on this program, and that is to integrate with others into the Guyanese culture, but we got to take something into that Guyanese mix. And what we take into it is our African culture. So we got to see Africa all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. Good evening to you if you're joining us from Guyana, if you're joining us from further afield in our Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago. Good evening to those of you in Barbados. I noticed somebody's joining us from Botswana. Botswana. That used to be one of the richest countries, and I think still is, in Africa. You know, it's under the radar. I remember as a small boy, Sir Siresti Kama, then the Prime Minister of Botswana, visiting. And I had the opportunity when I visited South Africa some time ago to cross the border and go over to Botswana. Quite a place. We don't talk much about it. And some of our teachers migrated to Botswana and taught there. And they had wonderful stories to tell about that country, Botswana. Around there with Zambia and South Africa, Namibia, and so on. Good evening to if you're joining us from Botswana, if you're joining us from anywhere in Africa, welcome to Politics 101. I'm teaching a graduate course in the Africa diaspora world, and one of my students is from Zambia, and I told her that there's a village in my country called Zambia. She said, "Oh!" I said, "Yes." So she said, "How that came to be?" I said, "That's why you're in this course, to learn about the diaspora." She was thinking she have to go and tell my mother that there is a village called Zambia in a far-off place called Guyana, the Africa diaspora world. Africa diaspora world. Good evening to you, those of you who are joining us from Brooklyn, New York, from Queens, the Bronx, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, one of my homes. Lots of my people there. That's where my mom settled when she migrated 50 odd years ago to the United States of America. And I tell the story of her passing Howard University because she lived down the road from there. And looking in and seeing all those black, according to her, black, beautiful black girls and boys walking up the hill. And she whispered to herself, I hope one day one of my children can go there. And then she didn't know how much it cost to go to Howard University. But one of us made it there. One of us made it there. Howard University. Howard University. Good evening to all of you there in Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, New Jersey. New Jersey, welcome to Politics 101. Not forgetting those of you in London. Nigel, joining us from London. London Bridge is falling, the Sparrow said. London Bridge is falling. It's quite a calypso, 1979. London Bridge is falling, chronicling all the scandals in the royal family and typical Sparrow. London Bridge is falling, and he loved to. Yes, greetings from Maryland, the DeFlormans. Yeah, my brother, I know that family well. One of our guests who's coming on tonight is from that area. Howard University, George Avenue. Yeah. That's why I like our people. Welcome. And tonight we're going to be going back to our plan. If you're fighting, you fight with a plan in your hand. Because that's how our parents fought. They fought with a plan. That's why they were able to come out of that plantation, and the next morning they buy land. And in that calypso, I'm a slave, Sparrow says. You know, every time I try to escape, them dog and them were there to bite me. So I had to stay. But a planning still how to make a brilliant escape. Not just an escape, a brilliant escape. 1823, 200 years. 200 years. One of the many stops along the way. 1823, the largest slave rebellion in the African diaspora. There were almost 10,000 enslaved people involved in that uprising. That's why Bob Marley named his album Uprising, Catch a Fire, Survival. That brother was bad. He understood history. 1823, and then 15 years later, 1838. 1823, the lessons. In many regards, we are watching 1823 right now. The kicking down of people's houses, bulldozing their houses, the brutality. Every time I hear the crack of the whip, my blood runs cold. Because they brutalize our very soul. Good evening, Brother Albert, up there in the quarantine. Keep the faith, my brother. Keep the faith. Keep the faith. We're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing it here. Don't lose faith, because that's what they want to do. The president went and he gave a speech on 1823, and the speech was about the 2020 elections. You see why we ought not to invite these people to our story. They don't know, and they don't care to know, and if they know, they have no respect. You come to 1823, the heroism, the brutality, the overcoming, the planning for nation building that came out of 1823, and you go there and you talk about 2020 elections. You guys passed black people. And we sometimes are complicit with that I pass. That's why I don't invite them to nothing I get. Nothing that I involve in. They have no respect. And we go there and we skin with it. Black man, know thyself. Stop it. All right. The plan. The plan. The plan. IDPADA-G. IDPADA-G. Remember that. IDPADA-G. This decade will have to continue, you know. Because a decade can correct and repair the damage that has been done. You all ready? You all ready? Tonight is school time, right? Right? Tonight is school time. School time. We're not doing Don is the man in the van tonight, you know. You know, whatever Sparrow said, you know, if I was bright, I would be a damn fool. We're not doing Don and the man in the van. We're doing African planning tonight. Welcome to our night school on Politics 101. Let me bring in my guests. Keep them waiting a long time. Let me bring them in. Sister Olive Sampson, Brother Theo Gittins. Good evening to you. And we're coming down to the end of the plan, but not the end of our conversation. I want to kick off tonight for us to reflect on 1823, to move us in to the discussion of this section of the plan. I reported just now that the president, speaking on 1823, was talking about the 2020 election and the kind of I-pass. But anyhow, I don't want to prejudice the discussion. Right. So Theo, let me start with you. Reflect a little bit on 200 years after 1823.
First of all, David, good evening to you and good evening to our audience out there. Good evening to Olive also. Indeed, the recent commemoration of 200 years after the Demerara uprising, last Friday, I believe, and the events that took place 200 years ago, I think it's important for us to recognize that following what happened in 1763, as you know, there was the Berbice Rebellion rising. 1823 was Demerara's turn, and as you said, David, the largest certainly in the Caribbean and in the African diaspora at that time, the largest uprising of enslaved. And that, I think, first of all, in terms of the action itself, was one of defiance, was one of struggle, was one of a determination to fight for what was deservedly ours. In the case of our ancestors, their freedom, their ability to work for themselves and to labor for themselves and not for somebody else, and not to give freely to somebody else, to enrich somebody else. And that's certainly a lesson that we have to continue to learn and to live, as it were, in our current existence, 200 years after. Our freedom won by their heroism and their sacrifice. It's a freedom that allows us to work for ourselves, to build our community, work for our children and our grandchildren. And we should never forget that. But the brutality of the suppression of that rebellion, that event, that uprising, to use a simple word, the brutality, and I don't want to go into the gory details, but many of the leaders and some 200 or more of the former slaves were actually executed in an act of absolute barbarism. And indeed, the way the whole uprising was put down is also a lesson that those who have an interest in the status quo will do all within their power, using all manner of resources to defeat what we are trying to do and what in fact is our birthright. We are told that they imported soldiers from Barbados to have to put down the uprising in Demerara. And that is a lesson that when those who are in fact hell-bent on maintaining the status quo, which of course is not in the interests of African Guyanese to a large extent today, and they are hell-bent on that, then they will use whatever resources, including calling on external resources to do so. So for me, that's a lesson of 1823, both the activism of our forefathers and of our ancestors, I should say, fathers and mothers, because both were involved. The activism, the heroism, the ability to plan, as David said, but also to execute, the ability to sacrifice, and all for their freedom and for their children's freedom and their grandchildren's freedom. And of course, on the other side, the fact that those who are hell-bent on maintaining the status quo, once they have the power to do so, they will do so with absolute barbarism and tenacity. So it's a struggle. It's a very dialectical struggle of force against force. I leave it there, David.
Yeah, and it's good to see, our alma mater, yours and mine, the University of Guyana, taking the lead in these observances. You, Olive, myself, all of us came up at a time when universities were hotbeds of rebellion, and before you learn all the dialectics, you learn how to protest. Many of us cut our teeth. On those campuses, and it's good to see the University of Guyana reaching for that tradition and being in the forefront of the observances. All praises to them. Olive, as you reflect, tie into your reflection the coming to Guyana of the Gladstones and the former Prime Minister and his wife are also there. The convergence on Guyana, tie that into your reflections.
Okay. First, good evening to you, David, to Theo, and to the audience. I thank everyone who is here with us tonight. David, if I might preface my comments, because of all that you and Theo have said, to just take a quote from John Henry Clark, U.S. famous African-American historian, who says, "To control a people, you must first control what they think about themselves and how they regard their history and culture. And when your conqueror makes you ashamed of your culture and your history, he needs no prison walls and no chains to hold you." When I thought of that as I listened to the Calypso and to the commentary, because I think that we as African Guyanese, our society, we are still very much in the mold of the story that was told by the British, our history as we learned it in school. And so even with the coming of the Gladstones and the dignitaries who are there to address questions of reparations, think that we need to step back and to really reflect on the nature of the horror that they are attempting to absolve and to address. Apologies are very important, but they are minor stepping stones when one considers the enormity of the crime against humanity that was perpetrated, the greatest crime against humanity, against people of African descent, and specifically in this case. You know, I mentioned to you a few weeks ago, David, that we speak about the plantations in this very nice word. It's very polite, and in many ways, it conjures up images that are idyllic. Whereas our people were working on forced labor camps. That's the modern language. We're in forced labor camps. And so I think that even as we listen to the speeches, we hear the apology, we must keep in mind the extent of the crime. And so our demands must be to address that crime. We should not be bought off with pittances, right? And even as a state deals with these kinds of offers of reparations, etc., the state itself must address its own obligation. The way in which Guyana itself has benefited and continues to benefit. I mean, I'd say that, but I said it before, but I think it really begs repeating that it's not only those in Europe, but also the state of Guyana still benefits from the work of enslaved persons. Rodney quotes the Venn Commission. When the Venn Commission itemizes the millions of pounds of mud that our people moved by hand, created that entire coastline that we live on, that we have, that commerce takes place on. We are owed that debt. And so that is what I would like to say. I would also like to make one quick point again about history and about the importance of knowing our history. I was reading an op-ed in the Stabroek News on Friday of last week, 1823 it was entitled. And the op-ed said, it was a recount of the entire 1823 uprising. And in the penultimate paragraph, it states that the people, these Africans who had revolted, were beheaded and their heads placed on staves at the seawall. Now, the heads were placed on staves at parade ground, but what Stabroek News was attempting to do was to use our ignorance to justify the government's misplacing the memorial at the seawall. It has no place there. Parade ground is sacred ground. Our ancestors were murdered, their heads were put on staves around that place. And we must make sure we know that. And Stabroek News owes us an apology for trying to get away with that kind of calumny.
Thank you for that observation, sister. And today I was catching up on American news, because when I'm out of America, I tend to block out a lot of the noise from America. And I was hearing about this law in Florida that says that they're going to teach African American history in schools. But they're going to teach that the slaves were taught skills. They were taught skills that helped to better them.
Yeah.
And we in Guyana are at risk of that happening
We are at
because
risk. Yeah.
we have enough people who are complicit in that nonsense. But go ahead, Olive, you.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And the thing about what is happening in Florida, which is also happening in other parts of the country, Arkansas as well, there are about
Yes.
19 states, that those are warning signs to us because the kind of history that we have learned is, I would say, comic book kind of history. We have to go back and teach people their real history. Whenever we speak about ancestral lands, etc., all of those rely on a knowledge of history. To the degree we don't know our history, we are robbing ourselves of our full citizenship and all that we should demand. And we put ourselves at risk of being oppressed further and even coming into a modern day kind of slavery. I know it sounds far-fetched, but it is not. It is not far-fetched. I think we need to look at Mauritius and what happened to African people in Mauritius and how they have been completely swallowed up, oppressed by others who have come to their country. So I ask for persons to investigate that. We are in a dangerous place.
We cannot afford to see not 1 inch of black space. And I don't just mean physical space here, but also intellectual space. More than ever, our intellectual work becomes important. I remarked this morning on a program about Sister Rhonda Lane, whose observations at a Coffee 250 conference has been taken by the Guyana Chronicle and CIOG, and they're turning it into hate speech. And I was making the point that this moment of our struggle is throwing up these indigenous activists like Rhonda. Clearly she reads.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly she reads. And clearly her activism is informing our commentary. And I had to say that our comments about the role of women in Islam is within the larger context of contemporary questioning of the male gendered nature of all of our institutions. They're saying what she's saying, to say it's race hate. And our intellectuals have to point out that what she's saying is part of a global pushback by women, including grassroots women, a questioning of our institutions. That's all that lady was doing.
Yeah.
Based on our observations, she was questioning the gendered nature of religion. Yes, Olive.
No, the whole pushback on patriarchy, it is global. And it is dangerous. It's a part of the whole colonial structure. And we have to change structures that oppress any people. So, I mean, I think that IDPADA-G is, as we've said before, and sort of a segue back to our implementation plan. Even as we work on that plan, all the benefits we seek, and I've said it before, but I really want to hammer it home, all of the benefits we seek will make for a better Guyana. Other people benefit. It's not only people of African descent. When we speak to food so that kids can go to school, or all the other kinds of things that we would advocate for. So yeah, I'm sorry that her remarks were taken out of context, but having been there and listening to her remarks, I would not have thought that anyone would want to spin that in that way.
Yeah, and they didn't
If I jump in here, David.
Go ahead, jump in.
If I jump in here, I mean, this whole concept of hate speech, frankly speaking, yes, there is such a thing, and yes, we have to be careful. But I also believe that we have to give and place in its correct perspective the right to speech, the right to speak, and to speak your truth. And your truth may not be palatable to others, but the fact is that is your truth, that is your experience, and that is what you, in fact, have come to know. And so we have to be careful and to push back against this broad sweep of condemning anything that is unpalatable to a particular group or groups as hate speech or what have you. Not everything is hate speech. There is something that's such as speaking the truth, and we have to let the truth shine through in that respect.
Thank you very much for that comment, my brother. And tonight we are slated to discuss capacity building.
Indeed.
Because it's important. And the conversation about capacity building in contemporary times can go back to Marcus Garvey, who I think had an absolute keen sense of the importance of capacity building. When I think about Garveyism, that's where I start. In terms of capacity building, he was not just the rhetorician, but he obviously knew the importance of capacity building. Over to you, Theo.
Okay, so thank you very much, David. Just to remind and to recap for our audience that in the previous 5 sessions we've had, we've dealt with the 5, what you might call thematic strategic objectives of the strategic plan. We've dealt with in the areas of economy, of education, employment, equality and equity, and the last one we dealt with last week was expiation, when we talked about the reparations issue and the apology for the wrongs done to African or African forebears. This final strategic objective, objective number 6, speaks about capacity building, and it is seen as undergirding and as permeating all of the other 5. Capacity building for us is critical in that we need to have the ability to implement what we set out to do. It just doesn't happen by itself. It takes planning, it takes working out strategies, it takes defining what our objectives are and what our goals are and what activities we're going to be implementing to do so, and what resources are required to do this. And so that is the crux of implementing the strategic plan. For us, it is not only implementing the 5 thematic areas, but also implementing certain elements of capacity building among the Afrocentric organizations in Guyana. And also, and Olive, I think you'll speak to this later on in our discussion, and also capacity building of the IDPADA-G Secretariat itself as a lead organization to coordinate, but also to help and to assist the member organizations to achieve their objectives. So as I go through this outcome, and it has essentially 6 outputs with 6 outcomes and 4 outcomes and 4 outputs. As I go through these, I will try to bring out very quickly what we're talking about here. Now, let me go straight into it. Output 6.1, as we call it, speaks of capacity building programs designed and implemented, meaning a large overarching program to, as it were, develop the capacity to implement the plan. And in this regard, we're talking here about building capacity among the IDPADA-G member organizations themselves. And here it is critical because, as I think Vincent and others, and Olive also, you've stressed, while IDPADA-G plays a lead role, a lead coordinating and perhaps a lead activist role in implementing the plan and in pushing the activities of the decade, it is also up to the member organizations of IDPADA-G to actually play their part. So this particular outcome of outcome 6.1 speaks about member organizations strengthened and provided with capacity to carry out their mandates in service of the African Guyanese collective. So whatever it is they see as their mandate, what it is that they're focusing on, they must have the capacity to do so and to implement whatever activities that they plan to do. In this regard, we talk about delivering targeted training programs for member organizations on topics such as leadership, organizational development, meetings management, funds management, events planning, outreach to membership, project development and management, and mobilizing resources or fundraising. These are critical capacities and skills that any organization must have if it is actually going to have the capacity to do what it plans to do. It must be able to lead, and lead in a very constructive way. It must be able to ensure that its organizational structure is appropriate to the tasks involved. It must be able to manage itself in terms of both as a democratic process involving all of its members, but also in terms of charting a course as to where it's going. And those are some of the skills that are in fact are intended there in that element of capacity building for the organizations, for the IDPADA-G member organizations. It also speaks about organizing intensive training programs to selective representatives. And this is the membership of those organizations. It's not only about the leadership of the organization, but the membership. One of the challenges that many organizations have is that the leadership sometimes are the ones who are upfront there, and it is not always the process of recruiting new members and recruiting new leadership in the organization. Organizations have to grow, and they have to survive in that regard. And the process of surviving means you have to, in fact, train new leaders as you go along. So leadership is very important in this regard. And what we talk about here in terms of strengthening the organizations is also strengthening the succession planning. You don't have a person who's going to be a leader forever, never, never. You're going to have a process of succession where leaders will train their successors, and those new leaders will come up and take forward the organization. This also speaks about convening periodic seminars and symposia and learning and knowledge sharing events, bringing together organizations, member organizations, on important topics and subjects in African Guyanese history, on culture and experiences, and towards building the intellectual capacity to educate and stimulate the membership. David, you mentioned intellectual leadership in intellectual space a moment ago. In order to do that, we have to develop the ability of organizations through learning, through sharing experiences, through sharing of knowledge, etc., to actually claim that space and to become those intellectual leaders, as it were. And so that's an important part of this element of building capacity among IDPADA-G member organizations. This objective also, this outcome also speaks about providing small grants on a competitive basis to member organizations that were supporting them financially. Now, I know the issue of grants and financial resources to member organizations is one that is a very contentious one. And IDPADA-G is really clear that it's not a grant, not an organization that provides grants as its main objective, although it may do so. And so this particular activity speaks about selectively, and as resources allow, providing such grants to organizations. And the last activity in this area talks about providing support and advice and guidance to IDPADA-G member organizations. Capacity building is not only a formal process, it's also an informal mentoring process. And this is where the guidance and support and advice, etc. And this is where a role that IDPADA-G as a secretariat, as a coordinating body, can play, and indeed has played a very critical role. So that's the first outcome on the strategic objective number 6. The second one speaks about strengthening IDPADA-G secretariat itself. And I think this is important because any organization, any movement, any process needs to have very strong central coordinating and implementation capacity. And the IDPADA-G secretariat is precisely that body that is intended, or that should be expected to play that leadership role, that coordination role, and that mentoring and all the things I've talked about before. So the output there will be a vibrant and well-managed IDPADA-G secretariat, adequately staffed and resourced to carry out its mandate in support of the decade. Now, this is important. And I know that in some quarters, there's been an attempt to vilify the IDPADA-G and the secretariat as in a sense, misdirecting its efforts and misutilizing the resources that have been provided through the state. That is not a credible criticism because, as I've said before, for you to lead for any movement, and this is the movement we're talking about, the objectives of the decade of recognition, of justice and development for people of African descent is a movement. And as I think David mentioned earlier on, it will not be done or not be accomplished in one decade. It will take many decades thereafter. And for this to happen, you therefore have to have a strong and well-resourced a leading organization or organizations, as the case might be, that in fact have that role of coordinating, managing, of directing, of mentoring, of supporting, etc., those others in the organization, in the framework itself. And so the IDPADA-G Secretariat has that critical role, notwithstanding the criticisms that have been made by others, and I will not go into that. I leave that to Olive and others to deal with. But the criticisms that have been made that the organization, that the IDPADA-G rather, has been focusing on itself, has developed into a top-heavy bureaucracy, and all the ridiculous things that have been said, without recognizing, without perhaps wishing to recognize that for you to have a credible and a strong and successful movement of the type we're talking about here, you have to have a strong and a focused, a well-managed secretariat or coordinating body. Now, in terms of the activities to strengthen IDPADA-G, we talked about undertaking a review and a capacity mapping so that we can have a matching of mandate and functions. It's very, typical language in organization development. We talk about identifying human resource gaps, internal systems and financial gaps, etc., and deficiencies, and addressing those, of recruiting needed personnel to fill the gaps, etc., to carry out external training, internal and external training of its staff, to develop outsourced or by its own capacities, its own resources, a resource mobilization plan, focusing on both domestic as well as regional and international sources and partners. Now here I must pause. Critical to any movement, the type we're talking about, is a question of resources. And resources not only in terms of human resources, but financial resources. We need both. We need both the human and the financial resources. They often go together and supplement and complement each other. And so what this particular activity speaks about is broadening the resource base. The ability of IDPADA-G to mobilize resources needed not only from the state, but also from domestic elements or domestic supporters within the country, but also externally. And I know IDPADA-G has been doing some of this, and in fact, this activity is very much, as it were, along the lines that in fact IDPADA-G has been moving, and is intended therefore to provide the financial, as well as in some respects the substantive or the human resources, technical resources to sustain itself. This also speaks about developing a media strategy to plan and inform the outreach and publications, etc., by the Secretariat. Media strategy is important, as we've noted in the last year or so, especially in the context of the attacks that IDPADA-G has been subjected to. It's important to get your message out and to get it out correctly. And this includes both, or I should say not both, but not only an online presence, which is very important these days, but also the ability to engage with the media out there, both local and external, and to also reach your own constituencies, to reach your people, to reach your supporters, your support base, those for whom you are, who in fact, for whom you exist. In this case, the people of African descent in our context in Guyana. So a media strategy is very important as an outreach mechanism, as a means of getting your message out, and as a means also of, as it were, bringing into your sphere, shall we say, into your orbit, a support mechanism that will help you to withstand the challenges that ultimately will come. So that's the outcome 6.2, which speaks about strengthening the IDPADA-G Secretariat. The third outcome speaks about strengthened and flexible frameworks, promoting the maintenance, preservation, and observance of African and African Guyanese culture, language, etc., etc. This is the cultural part of it. And it speaks about culture, languages, art, music, dance, dress, etc., other forms of expression. We speak about strengthened and flexible frameworks because it's recognized that this is not the work of one particular organization, or it's not the work of IDPADA-G Secretariat by itself, but indeed the work of the myriads of Afrocentric organizations in Guyana right now, and I believe you have 6 or 7 member organizations, Olive, and you're going to speak to that, I'm sure, at some point in time. But getting them involved in networks, in collectives, in combinations, shall we say, and thereby providing, or thereby, as it were, presenting a framework for promoting the maintenance of the culture. It may be 2 or 3 organizations getting together to do something for example, the annual Emancipation Day observances. It may be organizations that get together to promote the soiree at Hope Town or other local community level observances. It could be any number of things. It could be the organizations that will get together to perhaps annually or every whatever period they wish to focus on, to look at the 1763 uprising and the 1823 uprising. As David said earlier on, you should not rely on others to support this for you or to develop this for you. You should be able to do it yourselves. And this is where the capacity comes in, and this is where you have those frameworks where member organizations, because as the organizations are the leaders in this respect of their respective constituencies, is where they come in, they come together, they pool their resources, intellectual, human resources, financial resources, and they implement the activities, whether it be in cultural activities, whether it be commemorative activities, whether it be social activities or what have you, but activities that are intended to as it were, to strengthen the forms of expression of African Guyanese, and of course the teaching of African history and African Guyanese history. So very important. And in this regard, we talked about preparing an annual work plan that is based on strategic plan. We talked about partnering with relevant IDPADA-G organizations and deliver selected programs, selected activities, events, and observances. We talked about playing a leadership role in organizing important events in the African Guyanese cultural calendar, Emancipation Day observance, and so on. We talk also about important role in mobilizing financial and other resources to community-based and community-led cultural activities. Very critical, because in a sense, it's at the village or the community that this really starts, and where in fact, as with the family, where in fact that process of education, re-education, some may say, re-education into the ways of the ancestors and into our history and our culture, is at a community level that in fact has to take place, because not everyone can move down to Georgetown or wherever it is, or to the urban centers to be part of the observances. The country is not your largest in the world, but certainly our populations are strong along the coast and some in the interior and areas of Linden and Coney and so on. And so things have to happen. These things also have to happen in the communities. And that is why, in fact, it's important to strengthen the community level and community-led observances and activities, etc., and ensure that they have in these observances and these activities a proper understanding and to be able to properly reflect back to the community members the history and the culture from whence we come. So that's very important, the authentic African Guyanese history and culture. And therefore, the strengthening of community-based organizations is very critical in that regard. We talk here also about providing advice and technical support to groups, communities, member organizations who want to organize these kinds of activities. And this is the role for the Secretariat. I know the Secretariat has been doing that, of providing that kind of support through mentoring, through guidance, through providing them with some amount of resources to help them to and to strengthen them. And this is the capacity building, to strengthen them to be able to implement those activities that they want to implement, whether it be the dancing shows and drumming shows or competitions, whether it be art and culture exhibitions, art and sculpture exhibitions, and so on. And we talked also about working with relevant cultural organizations in the preservation and revival of traditional African Guyanese social and cultural events and expressions, including Rastafarian expressions, cultural observances, and such as the kwekwe and what have you, and these are tied very often to weddings and other kinds of observances. And where we in fact go back to those kinds of expressions that we've had in the past that are part of our culture and our heritage. For example, with respect to christenings, weddings, and funerals, and the games you play, children and youth, and so on. And I mentioned here salt pen, which of course is something that those of us who are of a certain age would know about. The foods and drinks, etc. I was very pleased when I went, for example, to the Emancipation observances, Emancipation Festival observances on the 1st of August. And I saw the range of foods and drinks, etc. That you don't see every day, but it's there. And I was happy to see it and as I walked around in the national park, that these things are alive, they're there. And so we need then to ensure that they become once again part of our history, part of our everyday existence, shall we say. So that's, and David, I'm going to wrap up shortly. That's the third outcome. The final outcome on the strategic objective number six, speaks about a strengthened operational capacity to coordinate and monitor implementing the strategic plan, including a media and youth strategy. And that speaks for itself. Any plan, and this is some of the learning we talked about, David, any plan has to have, even though it may be set out in nice language, etc., it has to have a focused implementation plan and activities to monitor and evaluate the plan. And so this last objective speaks about the annual, developing an annual work plan, as it were, that comes out of your implementation plan. It talks also about some of the ways in which we're going to manage the implementation of the plan, who's going to take the lead, and who's going to do what and when. These are very critical. Who does what and when along the way in terms of implementing the plan, and then monitoring the plan and evaluating the plan. And this is the last part of this strategic objective number 6. It speaks about capacity building. Capacity building is not only in terms of those skills and resources that you need to have to implement the plan. It is also in terms of how you ensure that the plan is on track, how you monitor the plan, how you evaluate the plan, how you feedback learning into strengthening the plan. And that's all part of capacity building also. And so that's the last outcome, David. I don't think I need to go into further detail there. We spoke about the one other thing I should mention, that we, under that particular output, we also speak about developing a youth strategy. Oh, yeah. Now, we know, and Oliver, I would invite you when I'm done to actually address this one, because one of the challenges that most organizations have is to bring the youth on board and to ensure that they are part of the process and they take ownership of the process. And I think it's fair to say that that most of the organizations in Guyana, whether it be, and not only the Afrocentric ones, but most organizations have challenges in bringing the youth on board and keeping them on board, etc. I know IDPADA-G has a youth representative, and the idea was on the CC, on the coordinating committee, and that I believe was part of the strategy to bring the youth on board and to have a youth representation, and hopefully then to have a robust youth strategy, as it were, and be able to as it were, keep them as part of the process, because they are indeed the inheritors of all of this. It is not for the old fogies, but for the people who are coming after us, the youth, and their children and their grandchildren. So the youth strategy, a very important part of all of this. And with that, I will end and pass back to you, David.
Yes, and Olive, you can come in.
Thank you so much, Theo and David. Quite a lot there. I want to start by putting into context one thing, and that is that of all of our strategic objectives, our very structure of and focus on economics, education, employment, equity, expiation, youth is cross-cutting all of those areas. So for all that we've discussed, our focus is also on youth and ensuring that youth are involved in decision-making, in the planning. So on, as Theo pointed out, on our coordinating committee or board, we have the chair of the youth committee. And every year we've had various youth activities, particularly focusing on leadership, on history, on business development and training for youth, etc. So very important. It is an area where I think we really want to urge more young people to become involved. I recall the young man at the Coffee 250 conference crying out for the greater involvement of youth. And I think that we urge youth to reach out and to become involved. Our doors are certainly open, and that of our member organizations across the country. I mentioned the last time, but it bears repeating, that we have grown from 65 to 67 organizations. Even now, as we're dealing with all of the issues we're dealing with, member organizations around the country see that what IDPADA-G stands for is something that it resonates with them and that they would like to be a part of. Theo spoke about quite a lot. I'd like to touch on some of what he has discussed, and to point out again another overarching issue is that our membership takes the leadership in many areas where they're already involved, and they have the expertise, or it is their focus. So, for example, we just commemorated the 1823 uprising, the 1823 rebellion. One of our organizations, 1823 movement, was very involved in leading that. And so you may not have seen IDPADA-G in the front of that, because our member organization in this instance took the lead, as is appropriate. It is their focus, it is their objective to work on that and to teach about that. And so they did, and did so quite well. We are all thankful for them for that work. A lot of volunteer work, a lot of time and effort went into that work. And so to Sister Penda and her volunteers, I salute them. Building capacity among member organizations. Theo spoke about organizational development, proposal, project design, project development, proposal writing. Those are some of the training programs that we conducted, multiple, not just one. And in fact, in last year, we had one of our most prolonged efforts in that regard that began in March, a training program that dealt with organizational development, proposal writing, project design, project development, reversed order. But the outcome of that is that 29 organizations worked with the staff of the Secretariat. And so this is a good case study of why you need a Secretariat that is staffed with people who have the ability to provide the training and support to the network. And so we were able to work one-on-one with 29 of our member organizations to help them implement what they learned in the training program with respect to project design and project development, and to write proposals. So 29 organizations wrote proposals. Those proposals were reviewed by a grant review panel of experts who were brought in. These were small projects, each of them up to $100,000. But what we did in that process is to build capacity so organizations now have a better sense, are better able to write proposals on their own, or turn to the Secretariat for further assistance if they continue to need it. That is what the Secretariat would be there for. As an aside, I should point out that as a result of the fact that government has suspended our subvention, the staff that was involved in this effort and available to help member organizations is no longer there. We do have few persons who are there in volunteer capacity, mostly, who are continue to support member organizations, who continue to be of assistance in this regard. And so of those 29 organizations there were actually 31 proposals submitted, 29 proposals were approved. While we still had funding, 18 of the proposals were funded at 85%. And we were hoping, and still do hope, that with the subvention restored, we will be able to complete those payments. But IDPADA-G was not founded as an organization that would provide grants. It was an organization that would work with the wider community through member organizations to do the capacity building, to provide the support, the preservation of our history, to support the work of member organizations through a secretariat that is staffed with the kind of capacity that would be able to help. So, for example, persons from member organizations or the wider public came into our office to work, to sit with someone in front of a laptop, really hand-holding, to help them with the completion of forms for submission to the Small Business Bureau, or for a proposal that was submitted to SLED or to another institution. That is what the staff was there for. The staff was there to serve. In fact, the way the office was structured, there were staff assigned to regions of the country to work with persons and organizations in those regions. So they knew who to call, and those people could be of support them in any way possible. I'd like to talk a little bit about the strengthening of the cultural frameworks, preservation of history, culture, commemorations. Again, I want to point to the 1823 recent commemorative events led by one of our member organizations. And so IDPADA-G would support across the country organizations as they mark events such as emancipation. We would try to send speakers. In some instances, for example, one organization in Hopetown had a sporting event for youth. We were able to provide the prizes, to send someone to do a speech on history as part of that event. And similarly, we've done that across the country, and would like to continue to do that. I'd like to, I know it's already 8:14, to say that we have not sat on our laurels. We have gone out. We are seeking additional funding, not from abroad. We're thankful for funding that we've gotten to continue to keep our doors open from local business persons and individuals. I encourage your audience, David, to support IDPADA-G. Our office at Lot 14 North Road. Donations could be dropped off there, or simply come to volunteer your time. Call the office to offer that support to come in, because we could always do with volunteers to do a variety of things. And also to say that we are quite cognizant of the work of our member organizations and want to continue to, and we continue to support them, in spite of the fact that I'm sure members of the audience have seen recently where some of our member organizations received what we refer to as cash grants from government. Those organizations were free to do that. They are in fact receiving a cash grant from government that has absolutely nothing to do with the subvention, which is a matter that's still being considered by the acting Chief Justice. But that gives them the assistance to continue to do their work. But even as that occurs, we continue to seek additional funding for the night schools that we have supported in Sophia and in Kildonan, and would encourage your audience to keep us in mind.
Thank you, Sister Olive Sampson, CEO of IDPADA-G, bringing us up to speed with what IDPADA-G has been doing, even after subvention was taken away, suspended. Continue to use whatever capacity they have to continue to do that work. Brother Theo, give us a wrap. We've now come to the end of the 6 strategic objectives. Give us a kind of wrap of the entire strategic plan.
Okay, David, as I've been stressing over the last 6 presentations I've made, in as much as the plan is divided into the 5 thematic or substantive areas, and we refer to them as the 5 E's: economy, education, employment, equity, and expiation, and the 6th being capacity building. And as much as these are presented in a sort of compartmentalized manner, we must recognize that these form part of a complex, that indeed they are interlinked. As we discussed some time ago, you must have, as it were, an economic base for progress in the African Guyanese community. But we must also have the education, as it were, foundations to be able to spur and to continue economic activity. You must have justice and equity in order to ensure that the African Guyanese population gets its fair share and in fact is treated in an appropriate manner and not discriminated against. And you must have a focus on the capacity building, as I said before, to ensure that organizations that in fact work in these areas have the capacity to do so. And of course, you must have strong leadership through the Secretariat as well as through the organizations themselves, which, as you know, are part of the assembly and part of the coordinating committee, etc. So in a sense, this is an integrated plan, as all plans should be. And there is no one part that needs to be implemented at the expense of the others, or that needs to be sacrificed in that regard. I will not privilege any part or any one of the thematic areas over the others. They're all important. They all have to move almost in tandem. Yes, you may have to make choices to go along in terms of where you're going to put resources, but ultimately, they all need to be implemented. And the last thing I'll say is that, and we've been saying this all along, David, this is not a plan for the 10 years of the decade that, in fact, was declared by the United Nations. This is a plan that needs to be carried through, updated as we implement, new things added, new capacities incorporated, new directions incorporated, but a plan that has to grow and it has to be a living plan, and a plan that, in fact, will not be only for 10 years or even 20 years. It may take much longer than that. We don't know how long, hopefully not forever, but by the same token, we hope to see tangible progress. And lastly, with any plan, we need also to take stock and see where we are, and to do that periodically to evaluate how we're doing, where we are not achieving as much as we had hoped for or planned to achieve, and to take necessary steps to ensure that we correct these gaps, etc., so that we have a plan that is implemented in a holistic fashion that has impact and that gets us to the objective, and I end here, objective of justice and recognition and development of people of African descent, in this case in Guyana. Thank you, David, for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gittins, for walking us through this plan. And I hope that we can work with IDPADA-G to pull these episodes into one document or one tape, if you will, that can be used by those who are interested in the plan. Our people these days are more inclined towards the oral, and we come from an oral tradition, you know, and so we hope if we can pull the 6 episodes together in one document,
Yeah.
so it can be used. Yes, Olive, go ahead.
I'd just like to say one concluding thought after what Theo just said, and that is, I really hope that after all of this, your audience comes away with a clear understanding that what IDPADA-G was trying to do was comprehensive, and that the notion that giving money to individual organizations would in any way accomplish the same set of goals has been completely, I think, they should see that there are two separate kinds of things. Organizations individually getting money to do something in their community will not have the national impact that this kind of plan would have. And so supporting an institution that helps to address across the board these many issues for our people is something that we still need, even as organizations continue to do their own work within their communities. The two things are not mutually exclusive.
Thank you for that observation. And although we have exhausted the discussion on the plan, I would leave the Wednesday evening slot for IDPADA-G, and you will advise me as to how you want to use this slot going forward, this Wednesday evening slot. Issues that you may want to discuss, we can use this Wednesday evening slot for that. So
thank you so much, David. We appreciate that.
yes, and I want to thank you and Dr. Gittens for walking us through the plan. I know from the comments that our audience has learned a lot, and if after this discussion over the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks, IDPADA-G is not on our minds, then something is wrong. But I know IDPADA-G is in our minds, and it is now, it has long been a household organization. But I think now, with this plan out in the open, it shows the seriousness of the organization. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Theo. Thank you, Olive, for coming on again. And to you, the audience, thank you as usual for staying with us. I'll see you all tomorrow. Tomorrow evening, we continue our discussion, our mobilization, and we do so with a plan in mind. And the plan is to make sure that the African Guyanese condition is improved, and that areas that are lacking, that we are able to strengthen our capacity in those areas. If African Guyanese, when African Guyanese are properly empowered, Guyana would be a better place. And we have that opportunity to do so now. Two things they've always said, Black people can't plan nothing. And Black people don't have patience. Well, you all have shown patience. And our organization coming under the banner of IDPADA-G and utilizing our indigenous skills. Because this plan was not spearheaded by some foreign company. It was spearheaded by our own indigenous skills. Walter Rodney always talk about the Black intellectual having a responsibility to give back to the Black community. All of us, Olive, Theo, myself, all of us who are lettered and educated, we didn't get to this point in isolation. All of the people. The old lady who waited to cross us over the street as we were going to school to make sure we don't get knocked down. You know, those who, when they heard us speak as children, said a boy can talk or that girl can talk, the encouragement they gave us. Those who saw something in us and encouraged us, they're the ones who are responsible for where we are. And it's important that we give back. And so this plan was part of that giving back and engaging our community. I'll see you all tomorrow evening when we come again with Politics 101.